Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Welcome back. So, our custom is to go around and just say our names. If we could take a breath between you and the person ahead of you, that would be great. So maybe you can register a little bit. My name is Cass.
My name is Christian.
My name is David.
I'm Greg.
My name is Michael.
David.
Mike.
I'm Jim.
My name is Mariano.
Don.
Louis.
I'm Richard.
Francesco.
I'm Bob.
Peter.
I'm Mike. My name is Jason. My name is Stephen.
I'm Mick.
Ted.
George.
Tony. Jack.
Matthew.
I'm Larry.
My name is Paul.
I'm Charlie.
My name is Roy.
My name is Jeff.
My name is Jerry.
My name is Andres.
My name's Cindy.
Yes, we're privileged today to have Cindy as our speaker. She's an author, social activist, and explorer of the unconventional. Some of the books that she has authored are Wisdom Circle, a guide to self-discovery and community building in small groups. She co-authored with Charles Garfield, Sometimes My Heart Goes Numb, Love and Caregiving in a Time of AIDS. Co-edited the anthology Earthlight, Spiritual Wisdom for an Ecological Age. And since the mid-1990s, she has been active in local ecology in the San Francisco area, co-founded two ecology nonprofits, Earth Team and Close to Home, as well as serving as coordinator for Earth Day 2000 for the Bay Area. Her explorations have been in the field of spirituality, transpersonal psychology, and personal growth. Her website is cindyspring.com, and today she's going to talk about her new book, The Wave and the Drop, Wisdom Stories About Death and Afterlife. Welcome, Cindy.
Thank you. Thank you, Cass. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for coming here today, and I want to especially thank my friend Jeff, who I know is Bruein, and we've been friends for almost 30 years now. I really appreciate this invitation to come and speak. And to my dear husband, Charlie Garfield, who some of you may know as founder of Shanti Project. And we've been partners for 37 years, and he has been a loving support for everything I do, including this book. Thank you, Charlie. I'm here to share with you my journey of writing this book, because it really has been a journey for me. And I hope that you'll find meaningful moments in my story that relate to your journey as well. I'd like to ask you to imagine with me what it was like on a fall day in 2009. I was sitting with my mother-in-law in her apartment at the dining room table. We both knew that she only had months to live. She was 94 years old. And we were chatting about various things, and then out of the blue, she said to me, "What do you think happens when you die? What do you think happens when you die?" She had been raised as a Jewish, in the Jewish tradition, but ethnically and not religiously. So she really didn't have any religious background. And now she was facing her own death. And I was the daughter-in-law, the daughter that she never had. She had 2 sons. For 30 years we've been together. So there we were. And she asked me, what do you think happens when you die? And she knew that I had been practicing Catholic in my younger days, but left that religion and explored many other traditions along the way. And at that moment, I could have answered, I don't know. I'm exploring. I'm trying to figure it out myself. I don't know. But that's not the answer she needed at that time. She needed something more definite. So, out of somewhere, out of the deep soul or mind, I said, there are various wisdom traditions that have stories about what happens when you die, and I think each one of them has a grain of truth. When she said, well, tell me some stories. So I proceeded to tell her 3 stories, one of which came from the Hindu tradition, the wave and the drop. And that one is very simple and very basic. It's about a wave that crests and drops little drops into the water. And it's like our lifetimes. We're part of the ocean. We're part of a big wave. And we come down as little drops for a very short time, and then the drops go back into the ocean again. She loved that story. That was her story. And when she was in hospice a few months later and was going in and out of a coma, she said, I'm a drop falling back into the wave. I'm a drop falling back into the wave. And Charlie was there, and can testify. And so I got the sense of the power of that story to really help people through that kind of transition. A few years later, I lost another close friend. In 2014, I lost a dear friend of 40 years. And I watched them answer that question for themselves. And the idea came to me in 2014 that what I could do was put together a small book of stories, sort of like Aesop's fables for the dying time, taken from each of the major traditions. And so that's what the wave and the drop became. And I want to share with you a few of the insights that I gained by having to really explore each of those traditions and find the essential message, and I hope that I've done that in most cases, from each of those traditions, and put it together in a way that it's very accessible. I use lots of stories. It isn't conceptual very much. I use lots of stories from the original tradition, but also every single chapter has stories from people who are using that tradition currently, for whom that is their story. I talk to them about how it worked for them. So, writing the wave and the drop. It required courage. I didn't think about it at the time, but as I got into it, I had to find the courage to confront my own mortality. And we all think about it once in a while, but think about how you put off, writing that advance directive, or the will that you have to put together, or leaving your belongings to whomever. It's tough. You kind of find reasons not to do it. At least that was true for me. I had to look at my own mortality at writing this book. And I also had to look at my belief system. What did I believe? What was my answer, my own personal answer to the question, what happens when you die? So this whole project became an exercise in courage for me. It's also, in a way, a sketch of humankind's journey looking for answers to this question. Because through the centuries, through the millennia, we've been trying to answer that question, and various people have come up with, and various texts have come up with pieces of the elephant, pieces of the picture that we're trying to put together. So that was my task. So I've told you about the wave and the drop, and then probably the next chapter, the story of heaven, was by far the hardest chapter for me. And that was because I had grown up Catholic with 12 years of Catholic schooling and all that entails. And I had a lot of baggage. I didn't realize I had a lot of baggage. I was aware of the fact that I had some antipathies for some of the messages that I got at the time. But I didn't realize how deep the baggage went, because that particular approach has changed enormously over the last few decades, and I didn't keep up with the changes. So I wrote a first draft and a second draft, and didn't feel right, and people said, no, this doesn't feel as good as the other chapters. There's something wrong with it. So I had to start from scratch again and talk to people who were holding the Christian or Muslim version of heaven, and find out what was contemporary, what were they thinking. And then I was able to put together the story of heaven in a way that I hope benefits all of us. And I want to read you, every chapter begins with a story, an opening story. So let me read you the story that begins the chapter. And this one I got from a friend of a friend, because I kept asking people. Her name's Peggy Flynn. She lives in Milwaukee, and she is a hospice worker. And this was her story. I had been at the hospital with a client for 7 nights straight, a man I had not met before. A friend of his had called me because he knew that I did this kind of volunteer vigil keeping. The dying man was terrified, especially of dying alone. He had been too weak to talk. He just wanted to see a face whenever he opened his eyes. About 4 a.m, he was struggling for each breath. I wanted it to be over as much for myself as for him. I wanted a shot of Jameson's, a hot bath, and a bed, in that order. I was standing by his bed, holding his hand. Suddenly, he gripped my hand with amazing strength. His eyes opened wide, and he asked, "Am I all right with God?" My mind started racing with thoughts. I'm not a priest. I don't know this man's religious background. What should I say? He repeated, "Am I all right with God?" There was a moment of absolute silence that seemed to absorb even the machine beeps and the wheezes, the mucus rattling in his throat. I felt my body in the hospital room fill with love, palpable, textured, alive. I looked into his eyes and said with a smile, "You are so loved. You are so loved." His face cleared, his eyes gentled, and he died. What I learned from my Christian friends and also from reading current Muslim texts is that the sense of heaven is the place of the beloved community. That's a phrase that Martin Luther King Jr. popularized, and for me that captures it, the beloved community. It's the place where everyone is welcome. When I was raised Catholic, we were told only Catholics went to heaven. So the good news is now that we're all invited. And I mean, that was part of the baggage I was carrying. And so that has become the touchstone for me of that particular story. Now, how many people grew up with the story of hell, which is part of the story of heaven, as an eternal damnation, a place of eternal damnation? I see a lot of hands. Okay. Let me tell you. The good news is hell went poof. That's quick. Okay. I felt compelled to put a paragraph in, but it's a contemporary paragraph based on what I read from current theologians and both Christian and Muslim, because both the religions use the same idea of heaven pretty much. And what I came up with in my understanding is that hell is separation from God in their terms. Hell is a separation from God. You're outside that beloved community, but you put yourself there. You, by your choices, of behavior and thinking, put yourself outside, and that can be a hell. And hell can happen here on earth. And hell can happen on the other side. But that's only because of your choice to be separate from. And the good news is it's not eternal. Everything I've read now so far in terms of afterlife and channeled material says there are always spirit guides and people coming to say, come on, join the beloved community. You're more than welcome to join us. And eventually most souls choose to do that. So you can only take it on faith right now. I don't have an authentic story of that, but I do want to say that my book came out on March 21st this year, 2018. 1 week later, March 28th, Pope Francis came out and said, there is no hell. 1 week later. I spooked him by a week. Of course, he got lots more media coverage. Another story from The Wave and the Drop is the story of reincarnation. This is my Buddhist chapter. That we have not one but many lifetimes to hone our consciousness and to evolve toward the one. Now, I know that not all Buddhist traditions hold to reincarnation, but the one that I chose, especially the Tibetan Book of the Dead, which I used, is definitely the kind of the basic Bible for reincarnation. I opened that chapter with the story of Aldous Huxley. How many people know who Aldous Huxley is? Yeah, one of the most brilliant minds of the 20th century. Wrote Brave New World and many, many other novels and works of nonfiction. My favorite is something called The Perennial Philosophy, which he attempted to take all of the spiritual traditions on the planet, East and West, and find the common ground for all of them. And it's a tome. But it's well worth the read. And so for me, he's just a giant figure. So what tradition, knowing all the traditions that he covered, what tradition did he choose for his dying time? He chose the Buddhist tradition, and he chose the Tibetan Book of the Dead. His wife, Laura Huxley, read to him from the book and coached him through the tunnel, which is what the Tibetan Buddhists call it. And she says, you're doing beautifully, darling. You're moving through the tunnel. Look at the white light. You're moving toward the white light. And she coached him through that whole dying period until he passed on. He died on November 22nd, 1963. Anybody know who else died that day?
Yes.
Kennedy, right. John F. Kennedy. So his obituaries got obliterated, which maybe he preferred it that way, I don't know. But the same day that Kennedy got shot. And he moved on, and his choice, knowing all the religions and the depth that he knew, he chose the Tibetan Buddhist way to go. There's also beings of light that supposedly meet you on your way, and that same idea comes from stories of near-death experience. There are hundreds, thousands of near-death experience stories that have been chronicled, that have been collected in books. Individuals write their own story. The one that I chose to open my chapter with is called Proof of Heaven by Eben Alexander. It's a bestseller in 2013, where he was a neurosurgeon in a coma and then actually died or was declared dead, and talks about this incredibly beautiful place. Everybody calls it ineffable, so any words that we try and use are really run short of what it is, but of incredible beauty and color and love. And he went there and he thought this was it, that he had crossed over, and he was told that his work was not complete and he had to come back. And that's what all of the people who experience near-death experiences, from trauma in an accident or from surgery, dying on a surgery table, come back and they say, I came back. I was told my work isn't finished. Well, Eben Alexander came back and wrote a million bestseller that opens that whole idea of what heaven is for many millions of people. The other part of that chapter, which I also find intriguing, is the studies that have been done at the University of Virginia, first by a man named Ian Stevenson and then followed up by a man named Jim Tucker. And they have over 2,500 cases of children remembering past lives and telling their parents. I remember when I, was a fighter pilot. I remember, in the one story I chose to use, I remember when I was a movie star in movies, and in the middle of the night, this little kid would say, "Lights, camera, action." His mother said, "Where did you ever get that from?" And so she got books out of the library, and she helped him. His name was Ryan. We went through books, and one day they saw a picture, and he said, "That's me. That's who I am." And he talked about having 3 sons, have a swimming pool in Los Angeles. They were in Oklahoma. And so she got in touch with Jim Tucker because she had heard that he studied kids who could identify past lives in a lot of detail. Sure enough, Jim was able to find a film archivist who figured out who that was because he wasn't credited. He had such a small part in the movie. And they went to Los Angeles and met the man's daughter. And the mother and Ryan went. And Jim Tucker set it up, and they verified a whole lot of the details that Ryan said were true, including the names of the kids, some details that the daughter didn't know about her father. Ryan hid behind his mother. He didn't want to talk to the woman at all. And when they left, he was done. He didn't want to deal with that anymore. And what Dr. Tucker said was that that's so common. When kids are actually presented with somebody from this other life who may be still living, they decide, no, I'm going to stick here. This is my life, and I'm going to stick with it. And they let go of all of that older stuff because they can see that they can't, they're not living now in this present time. And so they choose to move in the direction of being here now. And there are hundreds and hundreds of stories that have been followed up of kids who know details that they couldn't possibly know about people in other countries and other lives. And one of the most astounding things is that occasionally, if the person died from a war wound or getting hung or whatever in some other lifetime, they have the scar from it. The child has the scar from it. So, go figure. There's just a lot more going on than we can appreciate. And again, there's the whole NDE chapter going on in that. The story of the circle. The story of the circle, one of my personal favorites, because I was following a path through nature for a number of years. And that's given to the variety of stories that come from indigenous people. And indigenous people often have their own versions of all of that, but the thing that's most basic is the circle, is the seasons, is the cycle, is the moon cycles, the sun cycles. All of that is part of every indigenous story. So here's the opening poem that I used for that chapter. Not for me steel coffins, nor even a pine wood box. Lay me out in the wilderness and let me return to earth. Tear my flesh, coyote, and I will run with you over the plains. Take my eyes, eagle, and I will soar with you in the mountains. Pick my bones clean, little beetles, and I will flow back into the life stream to think like a mountain and sing like a river. It's a poem from a native woman in Nova Scotia that I discovered, Mary de la Valette, and I wrote to her and she gave me permission to use it. It not only underscores the cycles thing, but it also underscores that sense of belonging to a larger cosmology, that all beings are connected. Everything is connected. What am I doing here? What I plan to do, I need to move ahead. Okay. What I plan to do is talk for about a half hour and then do some Q&A. There is a chapter on self-deliverance, which is another term for suicide, another term for death with dignity, another term for right to life. I open that chapter by saying, this chapter may not be for you. If you believe that thou shalt not kill includes yourself, then this chapter is not for you. But 24 legislatures in this country are considering that. We do have the right to die in California, thanks to a ballot initiative, and Jerry Brown. And, of course, Oregon was the first state in the country to pioneer that in the early 90s. And ironically, I tell the story in that chapter of Peter Goodwin, who was the doctor that pioneered the law and fought with the legislature and got enough support and finally made it happen. And at the end of his life, he got a very serious debilitating disease and needed to use the law himself. Mm-hmm. So it's almost like he set up the whole thing for himself. One of the hardest stories to tell was the story of transformation. I wanted to include it because it shows up in different ways in the different traditions. Here's the opening story as told by me. This is a personal account. I start with quoting my friend. I've seen a 7-foot-tall angel, all-white angel, standing in the hallway a couple times this week. I think the angel is here to take me home. I was in conversation with my friend of 40 years the week before he died of lung disease. He told me that the angel had been as present as I was that day. We were sitting in his office and I could see the computer screen over his shoulder. Emails were pouring in from his friends, sending him love and healing energy. Everybody knew and he knew it was pretty close. I asked him if he wanted to talk about dying, and he shook his head no. A few days later, his wife called me after he died and invited me to spend some time with his body. It had only been a couple of hours. Maybe his spirit was still present in the room. I asked him if he had anything to tell me. He'd been a jazz musician all his life. I suddenly looked up at the ceiling, and from a corner, I distinctly heard "When the Saints Go Marching In." It sounded like it was coming from an old-time radio. Several months later, that was the theme song at his memorial service, attended by hundreds of people. I told his wife Diane that I'd heard that. And Yoshi's had a wonderful memorial service for him. That was in 2014. So the story of transformation can be found in many of the wisdom traditions. It's the moment when the drop starts falling back into the wave. You're going back into the wave and losing your individuality. So it can mean surrender, a kind of surrender, acceptance that my body is ending, and that also from the Buddhist tradition can mean a larger awareness of impermanence. Everything is impermanent. It can mean a complete dissolution in the ground of all being. That's what Aldous Huxley called transformation. I think there's several stages you have to go through before you get to go into the ground of all being. But he wrote about it very compellingly in The Perennial Philosophy. And one of my favorites, Richard Bach, who wrote Jonathan Livingston Seagull, had a version in one of his books. What the caterpillar calls the end of the world, the master calls a butterfly. What the caterpillar calls the end of the world, the master calls a butterfly. Transformation. Okay. One of the books that I really relied on, especially for this section, is a wonderful book called The Grace in Dying by Kathleen Dowling Singh. And she worked with hospice people in Florida for decades and talked about that last few moments. Sometimes people move into their death with more acceptance early on, but a lot of times it only happens in the last few minutes. You accept what's happening. And a transformation happens because you realize that you're just losing your body. You're moving on, but you're ready to lose your body. And holding on to that body for most of us is very strong and hard to let go of. At the end of The Wave and the Drop, I have an epilogue, and it begins with a Yiddish tale, which I just love. When the world was still young, Truth walked around as naked as she was the day she was born. Whenever she came close to a village, people closed their doors and shut their windows, for everyone was afraid to face the naked Truth. Understandably, Truth felt very alone and lonesome. One day, she encountered Story, who was surrounded by a flock of people of all ages and followed her everywhere she went. Truth asked her, "Why is it that so many people love you but shy away from me?" Story, who was dressed in beautiful robes, advised Truth, "People love colorful clothes. I will lend you some of my robes, and you will see that people will love you too." Truth followed her advice and dressed herself in the colorful robes of Story. It is said from this day on, Truth and Story always walk together, and that people love both of them. So, what if the acceptance of our death is the final stage of our maturation as spiritual beings? The acceptance of letting go of the body. That's a question that I've been pondering. And what if fear of death is the final spiritual test? Maybe if we can accept our own death, as the wisdom tradition suggests, then we get to graduate with honors from this lifetime. I don't think, and this is my conclusion, I don't think that any of the stories captures the whole message. That each one is a piece of the elephant. How many people know the story, the Hindu Buddhist story, Piece of the Elephant? Most everybody does, right? So I won't repeat it now. Piece of the elephant means you describe the piece you have, but it's very different than some other piece that someone else is describing. But it's the elephant. It's the whole elephant. It's just that people can't see the whole elephant. What I did at the end of the book is to take the single line from each of the stories and put them together, and this is what it sounds like. You are a drop returning to the embrace of Mother Ocean. Welcome to the beloved community. You are leaving the world of suffering. Welcome to the divine light. You are returning to the center of the circle. The pain of separation is over. You are dissolving into the ground of all being. Those are the principal messages. So I'd like to close with this. If this talk, or possibly reading my book, The Wave and the Drop, brings you closer to considering your own mortality, as I had to do, and considering the possibility of an afterlife, and I had to grapple with my beliefs on that, then I think that the book has fulfilled its purpose. And maybe this talk, that's all you need is this talk, to start thinking about some of the questions that I've raised. And I'll end with my own conclusion. I do believe that death is a transition, and there are so many more dimensions than we know of. Thank you. Okay, questions? It's a heavy topic. Yes, Cass.
In working on this book and studying the different traditions and learning what the different conceptions are, did anything kind of about change about your conception of death? What you started out with? Anything that stands out? I'm sure there were lots of changes, but anything?
Well, I'll tell you the truth about one thing that's happened, because I'm writing another book now, which is an extension of that. I thought, with good reason, that somewhere in the traditions, by putting them all together, I had not found one for me that I could call a home, and I think it's fine when people do. I think it's wonderful when you really dig into one particular tradition. But for me, I tried Taoism, I tried Buddhism, I looked at Sufism. I mean, I really explored all of it. And I didn't find a home for me for 30 years until I discovered the spirituality of nature. And that's what got me involved in ecology, local ecology, and I was able to expand on that. It's all connected. There's a spirit world operative here, and I mean, it just had a lot of the parts that I needed. So when I wrote the book, I thought, well, I have my own, spiritual path through nature. But again, I was doing this as a kind of Aesop's fables for other people, because I saw how useful it could be for a person to have a story on the way out. And I want to add something to that, help me remember. But I also found that none of the traditions even added up to a whole story, that there was so much more beyond, to look at beyond, not to stay in the traditions, certainly to appreciate what we have from them, but to explore beyond the traditions, and that's what I'm doing now. And I have to tell you that one of the things that came up toward the end of my work on this book was the notion that when you cross over, you get what you expect. If you expect heaven, if you expect Jesus, if you expect Buddha, if you expect Muhammad, if you expect a wonderful earth-like setting with butterflies and flowers, that's what you're going to get. And a lot of the people who speak of their near-death experience say, yeah, it's exactly what I thought it was going to be. It's just wonderful, okay? Well, there's a reason for that, because we carry those mental constructs with us across the bridge, all right? And that's to give us some comfort. I'm repeating this now from stories that I've read. That's to give us some comfort with the familiarity of all of that. It's not something totally different. No one, not a single person in a near-death experience said, all I did was sit at the foot of some guy sitting in a big chair and there were angels and harps all over the place. Nobody saw that version. So, but if you hold that version, maybe that's what you do see. But I think it's very interesting that the near-death experience people talk about it. People who've talked to their loved ones through mediums get those descriptions. Oh, it's just wonderful here. So I can't tell you. The music, the colors, everything. It's so wonderful here. So maybe the story is at least worth that kind of effort. It's what you're going to get on the other side. So have a great story. Yes.
Thank you so much. That is very relevant to me. Of the people that they talked to with near-death experiences, did any of them talk about believing that there was nothing afterward? And if so, what did they experience?
There were people who talked about negative experiences, okay? Seeing loved ones in dire straits. No one talks about fade to black. Nothing. I mean, of course, when they did just recently, and I quoted in my book, 2011, 2012, huge study of near-death, of people who died in accidents on the surgery table and come back, okay? Only 10% of those had this kind of story. So maybe the 90% had the fade to black, I don't know. But they were also in trauma, they were also on drugs, they were also badly injured sometimes, and all of that. So who knows? But of the 10% of the near-death experience stories, they all had some kind of story. Yeah.
Hi, thanks, Cindy. That was great. So I've been hearing negative things now about cremation. Now I want to go to your ecological side.
Ah.
So cremation versus being buried in the ground. Or
Yeah.
I know there's a place in Bruein that does they just put you in a shroud and they bury you in the ground. What are your thoughts?
Well, I speak about it. I speak about burial choices in one of the sections. I think it's in the Native American section. And there are these green cemeteries now. You know, Fernwood here in Marin, where one of my friends was buried. I don't have any objection. I have my form all filled out. I am prepaid. So no matter where in the world I die, they're supposed to bring me back here and cremate me. Okay. Given the how much we're taxing the land, I think that's an argument about, you know, we're running out of space to have cemeteries. I don't think there's anything morally wrong with it, if that's what you're asking me. And it doesn't affect, apparently, what happens to you on the other side.
No. Not that I know of.
Okay. You know, there's some, and I have to say this, there's some certainly controversy about suicide, and that starts you off on a bad foot on the other side. But then others say, no, we have the right to end our lives, and we have the right to decide my purpose here is over. And in the chapter that I write, I take that position. Brian.
Thank you, Cindy. I'm curious about the surgeon who wrote the book about life after death. And wasn't he a major skeptic and atheist?
That's how he describes himself. Yeah. His name is Evan Alexander. He's written several more books since then. He's a major speaker on the near-death speaking circuit. He comes through San Francisco occasionally. His story is so powerful. And it is about having some kind of meningitis that they couldn't fit, they couldn't get him back. They couldn't get him back. He was in a coma for several weeks. The doctor in charge said, I think you should pull the plug. His wife was there. And, we're just keeping him basically alive, barely. He's going to be a vegetable. He's been gone so long. And she said, no. And slowly but surely, he came back. He couldn't talk when he came back. He was so disabled he couldn't walk. He had to go back to rehab and go through all kinds of processes. And several years later, the man writes a best-selling book, and he's up and about and talking about it. And he has all the documentation. I think it was UMass Hospital, one of the big Boston hospitals, and so they got all the documentation. This man was a vegetable for weeks, and now he's out there talking about it. So it's pretty amazing. Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. That was very interesting. I just wanted to ask, considering the breadth of what you've read, I'm wondering, I've heard that some or several spiritual faiths sort of subscribe to the notion that it takes a certain amount of time for the body to migrate out. Do you find any consistency?
Oh, great question. Yeah, that's a whole, certainly a book in itself, a talk in itself. Yes. And I'll just tell you what I believe from what I've read. That the spirit stays around when the body ends and often attends the memorial service. There's many stories. I mean, why would you miss something like that? All your friends are saying what a great person you were and doing, these wonderful things and saying these wonderful things. In fact, the story goes on, in many cases, they don't want to leave. Okay, why should I? This is so wonderful. I've never been so loved in my whole life. Why should I leave from here? And you get it that you can't hang around. And some people do. We call them ghosts. We call them apparitions. My friend Roy can tell you more about that direction than I can. But I have. So the sense is that some souls stick around here and they don't leave and they don't move on and they get stuck. And then there's, retrievals, first responders on the other side that come and get them and coax them on and say, you're really dead. And that becomes a spiritual practice for people. I know people on this side who do that kind of first responder work. And because the dead people respond better to people that they see as alive on Earth, right? If you're alive, then I must still be alive, and that's what they want to think. And what the first responder has to do is to gently, carefully say, remember what happened? Yeah, I was in a shipwreck, or I was on a battlefield, and I felt all these bullets going in me, Well, you know what happened? You actually died, and you've just been sticking around. But you know what? There's all of these people that are waiting for you. All these wonderful people that love you, your family, your ancestors. They're waiting for you to come and join them. That's, I understand the dialogue that goes on, and that invites people to leave this kind of stuck place and
Excuse me, did you say that there are people who are doing first responder work here? Like, how does that work?
You have to get trained for it. First of all, you have to be able to do something called out-of-body.
Okay.
Out-of-body experience, which is to be able to move your consciousness outside your body. And many people can do that. If you're interested in that, and I'm particularly interested in that, but Robert Monroe wrote 3 books called Journeys Out of the Body in different decades. The Monroe Institute teaches how to do out-of-body, and but you have to be able to move your consciousness. You can't stay in your body and be a first responder. You have to be able to actually move to where the person who's stuck in a kind of limbo. It really reminds you of the descriptions of limbo, where they don't want to leave here, and they need some help, but oftentimes they can be helped to move on. So Bob Monroe is a good source for that.
Yeah, thank you. It's wonderful to hear people speak frankly about what might be happening. I think we are we're unconsciously blighted to how powerful is the materialistic, there's nothing beyond this model. I just read this remarkable book about how to change your mind, about the impact of psychedelics on people who are facing death, and written by a guy who was an utter materialist. And then he took it, and he's quite shaken by his experience of what emerged from within him about the nature of reality and stuff. I was raised with a family that was very clear about the reunion part of dying, and
nice.
that people are waiting and do not tarry.
Nice.
And I cannot comprehend how people live, given the grief involved in loss, even with faith, who have none of that. How do you deal with the grief of the people you love dying, with the idea that there's never. I can't do it.
No, neither can I. And but you know, I mean, it is a little vague, and we're told. I mean, they always say at the services, right? We'll see you in heaven, and we'll be together again in heaven. But you know, is that just homily, or is that for real? And what all of the people from the other side who are communicating with us say is, yeah, it's real. We're waiting for you. But you raised an important point. Do we have another minute? Yeah, a couple minutes. Which is that why do we come into this lifetime, let's say this lifetime, and decide to have amnesia? That we forget about all that stuff. We forget about the fact that we came from a greater reality. We forget about all the lifetimes we've had or are having concurrently, depending on what you read. And why do we do that? I mean, why wouldn't we know? Well, the answer is you might want to, if things get bad here, you might want to, take off, and say, why should I put up with this horrible life? Why should I, I made so many mistakes, or things are going horribly, and so I'm going to go back. I want to go back home. We choose to have amnesia so that we can fulfill our purpose here. And there's a value to seeing this is the whole thing right now. This is what I'm supposed to be doing. This is my service. This, however you put it, this is my work here. My purpose is, and it may be just to, just to use this lifetime to improve upon, lifetimes are supposed to be parts of a larger whole, that we have many lifetimes, and so there's a larger entity. So, I'm working on this for the team, and I'm doing my part. So, and that's been said by the near-death experience people too. They didn't want to come back. Many said, I don't want to go back there when I can hang out here, and they will say, no, you've got to complete your work. So there's a choice about, being forgetful about that.
Thank you. Last question.
I'll be quick.
when I think about the returning, and that it almost feels like there's a finite number of beings then that are circulating through the afterlife back on Earth. And I don't know if you've ever encountered that philosophy or not, but I always think when people talk about, oh, everybody has a past life, which means that everybody on Earth is just constantly recycling around, that it connotes that there's a finite number of beings out there that are circulating. I mean, to me, I always approach it more as phenomena, that matter changes, and and there's not some. I don't really separate self from body, necessarily. So that's but I don't know if you've ever encountered that idea of being like a collection of beings in the universe that's cycling through, that's not added or subtracted. Does that ever come up in any of your research at all?
I can only answer. I mean, there's so many answers out there, but the answer that I have right now is that there are many, many, many beings circulating through Earth, because Earth is a wonderful moral gymnasium. This is a place where people come to really learn, deepen their values of compassion, of love, of generosity, of gratitude, because it's so tough here. Okay, you can hang out la-di-da in those other places, right? But they come here because it's a gymnasium, and I love that term, gymnasium. And so I have no idea how many. I do know, and this is what I believe, that people graduate from Earth, that and it may be because of a karma story that the Buddhists tell, or some other thing that, like, for instance, I'll leave you with this thought. I've been a vegetarian for almost 50 years. I don't want to come back to a planet that eats other beings. Okay, so I have put in my next life. I want to go to a vegetarian planet. I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So next week our speaker will be Laura Burgess, a lay and trusted Buddhist teacher in the Soto Zen tradition, who lectures and leads retreats at different practice centers in Northern California. She's an abiding teacher at the Lenox House Meditation Group in Oakland. And Charlie Garfield will be here in December, I believe, as one of our speakers. Donna is the Pali word for giving, and we will, our host will be circulating with a bowl in which we can contribute whatever feels right. $10 is a suggestion, but whatever you want to give to help us meet the expenses of renting this place, speaker fees, and our Larkin Street lunch, our newsletter, etc., etc., etc. So, do we have a host?
Yes, we do.
Could you say a few things?
So I'm the host, and I'm Mike, and yes, there are some, as I said previously, mostly helpful kind of munchies, so to speak. There are also a couple unhelpful.
Hey. There are also books, The Wave and the Drop, which are available at the discounted price of $10. And so if you'd like to have one, or if you think you know somebody for whom the book would really fit, the book's not a fit for everybody, but you may know people for whom it is exactly the right fit. So please consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other announcements? Yes, Richard.
Yes, GBS annual retreat is September 28th and 30th. There's still a few spots left, so if you're interested, you can talk to Jerry or I. Secondly, Community Thrift, we have an account that just picked up a check, ching for over $300. That's a quarterly check, so it's a great way to support the Sangha if you have something no longer serves you. You want to pass it along.
Is that it? Okay, so can we gather for a dedication of merit? And we'll have a social hour, social half hour. So please reach out maybe to the people who've just come back and new people. By the power and truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness that is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity, without too much attachment or too much aversion, believing in the equality of all that lives.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.